Okay, I'm Harold Meyer. Everybody calls me Harry. That started when I was a fourth grade student by a teacher, and it's stuck so far. I joined the service because the football team that graduated in the spring of '44, some of the kids were already turning 18, and they were going to join the service right away instead of being drafted. And I was 17, but I'd played varsity with them, and I was part of the crew, and I was going to go along no matter how it worked out. I had a tough time getting my parents to consent, but Grandma stepped in and gave a little pep talk for me, and parents finally let me go, and I went with them. We went down to Fort Snelling, and for our first round session, got all the paperwork done there, and they sent us home for a while waiting for space in boot camp because everything was filled at the time. So we had a month or two at home, and went back that fall and went into boot camp in Farragut, Idaho. Partway through boots, we were probably a little better than half done. They came through one noon when we went in to eat, and there was no chow line. And they just handed us each a sheet of paper and it had some questions on it. And everybody was grumbling and griping like you always do. And what's this all for? And what's it about? And I read a few of the questions, and I made the mistake of saying it's radio. And so one of the ones that was there, he says, well, go ahead and answer them. So I went ahead, and what little I did know about radio, I'd played with it as a hobby, and answered it, and they took the paper, and a little while, and he told me I can go eat. So the rest of the guys, they all looked at the paper and see if they could answer anything on it. But anyway, we finished up and had our meal and left and did the rest of the day's work. I get back to the barracks at about well, pretty close to 6 o'clock that night, and walk in, and my bed's gone, my clothes are gone, everything's gone. And so we're wondering what in the world's going on. And they said, well, you just stand by, they'll be here. And pretty soon, a couple more military people came in and called my name, and they picked me up and hauled me off to another unit. And finished up boot camp real quick. I got a short leave home, and by the time I got home, it was either the day I got home or just the day after I got home when there was a telegram came that we were supposed to report right back. And with transportation from the middle of Minnesota to Farragut, Idaho, in those days was not every day. So I had a few more days before I had to catch the train and go back. And then I waited about 4 days before everybody got back. Some came all the way from the East Coast. And then we put on a train and shipped off to California. We spent Christmas Day in the railroad yards in San Francisco with a dead train. And thank goodness there was some people that heard about it and came out and were giving us a Christmas lunch break or whatever you want to call it. And we went on down then to Southern California and were put into a radio school. And there was about 200, 250 of us all together. And the classes were extremely heavy, I thought. Well, being a 17-year-old and little knowledge of radio, I made the first class, but about a third of them got sent out, washed out, they call it. There were some of them that did it on purpose, I'm sure, because they didn't know what we were getting into at that time yet. And And I finished it up at the end of it, and there were about 50 of us left, all told. And went into code work. And this was the same code that the Navajo Indians used in their native language. And so if it was ever deciphered for us once, we could read it and do what had to be done with the code. So we worked at that for a few months. I suppose it was about 6 months while the war was still going on. And of course, with the radios, the distance we were picking stuff up was just unimaginable for that time of the industry. Electronics hadn't developed that heavy. And we were actually following battles in the Pacific by radio. And then all of a sudden they shut our stations down because the war was actually pushing up towards Japan. And then we were brought into San Francisco. And that was July we went up there, and we were put in lockup because of the code work. And we were studying the landscape of Japan for the invasion. So each one of us was assigned in a different section, and we were supposed to, from everything that they could get from aerial pictures or any information that they could get, however they got it, was put into that mock-up, and you were supposed to be able to find your way through it without any problems and be able to. We found out just before the war ended that we were going to be there 2 days before the invasion to be able to get established so we could radio out as the invasion was coming in where anything would be a mishap for the invasion forces. They'd been using this on different islands all the way along. And Harry Truman, thank goodness he had courage enough to drop the bomb. And the second one, we didn't know about either one of them. We had some rumors that went through the code work about it, but we didn't know they were actually that far advanced that they would actually be able to use it. And the Japanese surrendered on August, was it 14th? 15th here? Or 15th there, 14th, well, it was 1 day apart anyway because of the date line. And we were still held until they actually signed it on the decks of the Missouri, which was 2 weeks later, before they ever even opened the doors and let us out. So when we got out to celebrate the end of the war, there was nobody there. The town was empty. So, and then we were put into a unit that was going to put in communications in, and we were sent to Okinawa from there. And that was an interesting story in itself because we started out, they sent us to Hawaii. We had about a 4-day layover, and so I got to play one game of golf on R&R in Hawaii. And then we left on a merchant ship out of Hawaii, transferred over to a British warship at sea, and then left the British warship and went to American ship, the USS Albatross, a seaplane tender, just about 3 days out of Okinawa. And from there we sat and wait for orders to do whatever we were supposed to be doing and putting up communications. And there was a pretty good tussle between a couple of admirals, Nimitz and Halsey. Halsey wanted it on Okinawa, and Nimitz didn't want it on foreign soil. And the battle went clear back to Washington, and it was decided that no, it's going to be on American soil, so okay, we're going to go to Guam. Well, about the time they made the decision, a big storm came through Okinawa and wiped out all of our equipment, everything we had, and we were left homeless. And I've got pictures here with show of where we stayed through the storm and the different things that happened. And from there we transferred on a floating dry dock of all things to go to Guam, and that took us what, a week and a half, 2 weeks, and then we actually built communications on Guam. And then they froze us and held us over, so we were actually, well, we ran over about 4.5, 5 months over our time, finishing up in service, and finally they shipped us back to the States and home. But then they kept us 2 weeks after we got back to San Francisco, and we were really went through, I guess you would call it almost brainwashing, to hold these secrets without being able to tell anybody. Well, we knew that before too, but so my folks never knew what I'd done in service, and they never knew where I was at any time. I was just Pacific Naval Operations Pacific headquarters. That was it. And that's about the whole story, quick and easy, of a just almost 2 years of time. My hometown, by the way, was Red Lake Falls, and we had a very good football team that year. In fact, we were unscored on, and that's why I didn't want to break the string with the crew. But and we, when I came back home, of course I didn't finish high school then, because I left just going into a junior year in school. And when I came back, the superintendent, I will say, was probably one of the best people I could ever run into. He came out and was coaxing us veterans that hadn't finished high school to come back to school. And well, after what we'd been through, we didn't felt a little uneasy about, do we or don't we mingle with this younger group of children or kids, you know. And he finally, working one against another, well, if so-and-so will go, will you go? And he finally got 5 of us to go back. One of them was a farm kid that wasn't in service, but he'd quit school just to keep farming. But there was 4 of us veterans that went back, and we had quite a deal going in school, because things, I'll have to bring this one out. We had a brand new textbook that came out in the middle of the year, and there was some stuff in that textbook that was politically installed, which was totally wrong in what happened during World War II. And we brought that up, and so that's why I keep telling kids, like I did on the honor flight that we left on, you know, okay, you can read it, but verify it. And sometimes it's hard to verify. Sometimes it comes out way late. And all the code work that we done, the school I went in service, which I got a lot of credits for, high school, was in San Pedro, California. And actually it was in a fish warehouse made into a classroom. Why they used that, I don't know, because maybe nobody else would come snooping around it. But it was a big enough building and remote enough so that we could discuss things there that probably would never get into enemy hands. And then before we went overseas to Okinawa, we were in lockup in San Francisco Bay, and this room was our living quarters, sleeping quarters, and study, all in one session. And we were in there for Boy, that's got to be July to the middle of August, so it'd be a good 5 weeks without getting a break and going out. Never got out, never seen daylight in that time. Anyway, it was, and that was supposed, and then of course that was all ultra secret too, because many lives would be at stake if any of that information got out. So, and it put a lot of pressure on me, and I can have my wife verify it, because she would talk to me and I wouldn't even be there to hear at different times, especially if some of this stuff was coming back. A lot of the stuff took a long time to even come back after the indoctrination of and putting it secret and holding it secret. Places we were at is fine and dandy, but any of the work that we done and the codes. And my biggest shock was back in 1980 something. We went to Phoenix, Arizona. Her brother was working down there, and my wife's brother. And we went to the Capitol, and right in front of the Capitol was a monument, and had listed the Navajo Indians, first 29, that were in the Code Talkers. I seen that, and I was totally shocked, because as far as I was concerned, that wasn't to be revealed at any time. And I'd walk around and try and talk to a policeman that was there, or somebody in one of the offices, and what is this, and what, and oh, that was the natives that worked in World War II. And I still didn't know if I could say anything, because I'd never gotten clearance. And I have been back several times since, and I'll have to say one thing for the honor flight. I was scheduled to go on the first one, and I became the missing person due to an illness. But we used the flight ticket the next spring with our son and his wife, and we went to Washington on the ticket then, and we spent a week in Washington, and I got to be able to go into the Navy archives while they were off going to the Smithsonian Institute, which you can spend a week in alone. And the first day we were in there, and I was kind of hinting to the curator that was there of something that I wanted to know how much I can say, and if I can, and so he kind of reading through the lines, because I imagine he's had other ones come in with different things too. And so then he says, well, can you give me one clue? I says, well, the Code Talkers' names have been released, that I know. He says, oh, okay. He says, and he took off. And he says, I'll be right back. So he went and made a phone call, and he says, can you be back tomorrow? And I said, yeah, what time? And so he gave me a time list, and I said, okay, well, I'll make it. And so when they went to Smithsonian that day, I skipped out and went across and went over there and met them and got into the archives and found out that there's an awful lot that was released, but there's still a lot that's still hanging under black lines. So, but anyway, I can talk that, yes, the code work is open to the public. There are some things that happened that are still secret, and to the best of my ability, I realize that they are politically covering up something. So, mistakes that were made, really. But it's of no consequence anymore, because anybody that was involved with them is no longer here. They've all passed on into history. And it's kind of nice that you people are putting this out, so this will actually come out as some recorded history. some of these pictures and things that I've got here, there's some funny incidents. My main job, along with trying to break code, is we knew we had broken the Japanese code and never let them know, because we were careful in what we were using in our transcripts, because they were breaking our codes, but they never could break Navajo language. And there were a few times when the Navajos actually didn't even use code. They just used their native language on a very rushed situation, and which probably saved many lives. Ships, planes, and personnel on the ground, a lot of personnel. It was amazing what they could do, and the accuracy that they could detect for artillery. The ships would be out at sea. One incident, I'll refer this because I had a brother-in-law that was on the battleship, and this was at Okinawa. When the first landing craft went into shore, none of them made shore. They were destroyed by guns that were in a seawall. And the Navajos picked that up and called back and had the big battle wagons lay down, because those shells are big enough to take out almost anything. And when they got calling it, and they called it in by degrees of fire, and they actually, within 30 minutes, took out a half-mile of seawall. And when they got online, and and some of those shells had to be coming to within maybe 300 yards of where they were at. So they had to really be hunkered down and in protection too. And they could call a mortar unit and have them lob a mortar shell into a machine gun nest and be almost pinpoint accuracy with it. It was, I can't say enough for the Navajos. To them, I will say they single-handedly were probably the biggest lifesaver in the war. So, and I only knew them by voice. I've tried to meet a few of them, but they are pretty reclusive on their own. There's a few of them that have gone out on speaking engagements. And right now, there's only one that I know of the first 29 that's still living, and that's Chester Nez. And he's out of New Mexico. But he's in pretty poor health. He's lost his legs to diabetes and stuff. So, and I think we were put in with a CB group when we were putting in the communication system. The war is done now. Now we're trying to reestablish communications for future use, and we had squabble between the two admirals, and then that went clear back to Washington, and it was finally settled that we go to put it on Guam. But some of the funny incidents and things that would take place, we would pull pranks using the radio, of course. In fact, one of them was part of our unit was going home early. And of course, anybody that's got less points than you have and they're going home, you're going to try and get even with them. And so we put out a call by just getting into the communication system that was available, and made an announcement right at the docks that all stateside people were being frozen because we were going to go to war with Russia. What turned out to be a small prank turned out to be a realization that 90% of the vets were ready to go. I mean, it was just unreal. And we had I, thank goodness, wasn't the main instigator of that, but it was, and the officers that were there, they didn't know for sure if it was true or not. And but everybody was ready to accept it right then and there, and then we had to really calm the thing down and then let them know that it was actually a prank, and wished them bon voyage, and save one for us so we can get home. There's one left. That's a bar drink. But that was one of the mischievous things we could have got in trouble for and snuck away because they didn't know who to blame. No fingerprints. One on Guam, and I actually, well, I was back in high school, and the teacher was in English, you're going to have to write a short story. And so they had categories, and I looked at them and I says, can I just write about an incident that happened? And he says, well, he says, well, it's got to have comedy, it's got to have, characters, and I said, okay, yeah, I'm sure it will be, because I think it'll work out fine. So I called it Miscommunications, and then we're actually talking about misinformation. That's what we were doing to the Japanese. I better maybe tell you that first. Is over half of our job was making up messages that was using information that they knew we knew and putting the wrong directions in it. Like if we knew, well, we knew where the fleet was going to be moving next for the next engagement, and instead of having that fleet go the way that they were already scheduled to go, and everything was being set up that way, and we'd take them off maybe 90-degree different course. And if they had any submarines and stuff in the area, they would be sending them the wrong way, which would work out. But and we knew they'd break our code because we knew they had it, just from the information that they were using in their work, that they didn't know we had their code broke, that they had broken some of ours. And then that's the one we'd be using all the time to let them get this misinformation. We called it schoolgirl letters. So then when I got back in school, I was writing this up about schoolgirl letters and misinformation. And we, on Guam, we were putting in cables, and then a lot of the cable work, you'd put in part of it, and then you'd have to add to it. And so instead of sealing it up waterproof tight, you'd actually use what was a rubber boot. And the boot was slipped onto the cables, and where the small cables went out had smaller ports or smaller tubes out of the rubber sleeve. And the big main cable was always bigger, so you could open that up, peel the rubber back, get in and work on the wires inside, and then reseal it. Now when you got totally done with it, you actually seal it with a lead covering, so it was watertight. And we were running short on these rubber sleeves, so we always called them rubber pants. So in the service, the slang goes around. So we told them, hey, we need some more rubber pants. So they just got in and radioed in an order for these rubber pants. And what size? Well, we didn't, small, medium, large. And we got a shipment. It came with a fork truck to lift it. And it was not rubber pants. It was surplus military women's undergarments. And there was quite a commotion going on about that, and well, we better hide this mistake. We tried to send it back, and there's no way. It was off their list. They didn't want it anymore. And so he says, well, I think the people here on Guam could probably make good use of this. So we made a committee up and visited with a couple of the elders of the people there, and We had a distribution party where we were banned from. The only thing is we got in there to deliver it, and they were there already, and it didn't take them long, boy. They were holding them up and checking sizes all over the place. And the teacher says afterwards, he says, did they use them? I says, well, they were on the wash line. That's all I can say. So, but the funny part of it was, is when he'd done this for the class, he took these short stories and handed them out randomly to the students in the class. And then he was going to call on different ones, and I can still see Joanne today. She had that, and she looked at that, and she started reading it, and she looked at me, and she must have given quite a signal, because the teacher kind of noticed that, and he says, all right, Joanne, you read yours. She wouldn't do it. And so he took it, and he read it himself. And he looked at that, and he says, there's a few corrections here that need to be made. That's when he started asking questions about who got them and how they, if they fit or not. So anyway, that was one of the high school things when I came back. Other things in service, there were a lot of things. We had bananas on Guam, so you couldn't, I mean, it was just unreal. Oh yeah, Admiral Nimitz on Guam was a very, he was a very good admiral. I got in trouble the first time by one of his under lieutenants. We were stringing cable across a deep ravine, and it was quite a shot across from wall to wall across this ravine. And we'd put in cable, and we actually built cement bunkers to hold the ends of the cables, because there was going to be major weight that's going to go on this. And as we were putting the cable onto the message cable onto the main strand cable that holds all the weight up, we had a trailer, and then the cable with the cable in the trailer pulling it across all in one unit. But we had the lashing machine, which was tying the cable to the messenger, coming through at the same time. This probably weighed, I would say, 2 to 2.5 tons. And while this was being worked, all of a sudden I looked out and seen this guy looking down the cable at this stuff being winched across, and I hollered at him to get his blankety-blank head out of there, or it would get taken off if it broke. And nothing was said. And all of a sudden, some lieutenant come up behind me, and you're the one that was hollering over there. And I didn't even turn around to look at him because I was watching my job. And I says, yes, I did. And boy, he started chewing me out and wanted me to, I says, as soon as this job is done, then I'll turn around and address you. But until now, I'm doing my job. And it made him madder yet. And when it finally got all done, I says, if that cable would have broke, he wouldn't be here. He'd be in the morgue. And he was yakking about it for a little bit, and then finally he wanted my name and stuff, and I handed it, gave it to him, my serial number. And he went back, and I never heard anything from him. And this is strange. Usually you're going to get chewed out something. Nothing came out of it. And then, well, maybe a week or so later, Nimitz was actually building a residence out there because he was going to stay there for a period of time, and he was going to have the family there even. And we're putting phones in to the residence on a assignment basis. And we had orders, 1 phone per unit. And so I and another guy were there actually doing the wiring and getting ready, and asked, where would you like the phone, sir? And he wanted one there and one there and one there. Sorry, sir, only one's allowed. Well, he got all flustered about that a little bit, and I reached in my pocket and handed him the sheet that I had that was one phone per unit. And he looked at that and read that, and he handed it to his aide, and he says, "When the hell did I sign that?" Whoops. So anyway, he didn't say anything more, and he stood there for a little bit and turned around, kind of looked, and he says, "You're CB unit, aren't you?" Well, he said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "I don't know of a CB unit that didn't have anything they needed." I said, "Yes, sir." Nothing more was said. So 2 days later, we went back and put every phone in that he wanted. Nothing. And he never asked where they come from. And the only thing is he. Then he was in our where we were putting some more cable in, and he happened to stop by and ask if there was anything that we needed. And one of the guys over there says, "Yeah, we need somebody that can fix our refrigerator." There was one we'd found that was all busted to pieces, and nothing was said. Next day, we had a crew up from the dock that he'd sent up to look at that refrigerator. And went ahead and fixed all the leaks and stuff in it and pressurized it, and so we could have cold drinks in the refrigerator. And of course, we had good stuff and soda pop. And but it couldn't have been hardly over a week after that. One Sunday morning, this Jeep drives into our compound, and one driver gets out and walks in, and that's him. He drove himself up there. And he walked into our Quonset, and he says, and of course, as soon as we seen who it was, and we were in all sorts of undressed conditions. Some guys just walking with shorts on, and maybe lucky to have that on, nice and warm. And he walks in, and somebody hollers, "Attention, it's the Admiral," you know. "Ah, settle down, no bother. And he turned around and he looked and he says, "Is that the refrigerator?" "Yes, sir." "Does it work?" "Yes, sir." He pulls the door open and looks in there, and I know there was 90 cans of beer in there cooling. And, well, he says, "It looks good." And he just reached in, took out a can, and grabbed a can opener and started opening cans for everybody that was in the deal, and had one himself and sat there and talked with us. Nothing more was said about any problems. So to me, I'd say Nimitz he was really relaxed after the war was done, and he was still a very good leader. And as far as officers, our unit, CBE unit, if we had officers, nobody wore insignias, because we didn't know. Nobody knew what rank anybody was there, because none of us ever had a band of any kind on us that told us whether we were a petty officer or lieutenant or anything. And it was almost unbelievable, because we'd get our orders by radio, and so you didn't have to salute anybody to get an order. And okay, you got the orders, and then go ahead and put a work detail together, and we'd go ahead and do it. We used prisoners of war for a while putting in this cable in, mostly for digging, as we were going through coral rock. And we had a little problem with them that one time, because they had been promised a movie that night. And we wanted to get it done because of time restrictions and weather. We knew there was some bad weather coming. And we had about another 30, 40 feet of rock to break to get the cable down underground and have everything secured. And anyway, wanted them to finish it, and they were getting a little huffy about it. And and then one of the guys, some of them could actually speak a little English, and so we corresponded with them through them, and I told them we'd take them to our movie theater, and instead of have it in their compound. And ours was a Betty Grable movie, and I don't even remember what the name of it was, but anyway, the Betty Grable was just all the words that was needed. Our movie was going to be better than theirs, so they went back and started digging rock. And we had him, and we brought him in, sat him down, and a few of the other guys that showed up at the movie were a little bit leery of it, because there were still a few renegades in the hills, because we actually caught one in the mess hall too. But and we told them, no, just settle down. They're in their place, and they've been invited here by us. And that was the end of it. We went through the movie, and nobody said boo, and we walked them out first and back to their compound, and nothing was said. Nobody made any remarks about it later or nothing. So anyway, that's pretty much a pretty good junk on it. And so if we're finished with that, we'll go into a little movie, or pictures. I got a lot of notes here, but I think I've gone through pretty near everything that I got into it. It was losing my bed, and one of them I did miss up on was when we closed up one of our long haul stations. Well, it wasn't the one that was the best, and some of the other guys were being moved, and I was transferred from that one station, which closed down, to another one on the long haul radio. And I was out on Liberty when the orders came on it. And when I got back from Liberty, there was a note on the door. You've been transferred to such and such a station, and report in there. And I looked around, who am I going to ask? Where's it at? And so anyway, I went and asked at a filling station, where's this Dana Point? That's a point in Southern California. And the guy at the station, he says, it's down the highway about 60 miles. Yeah, okay. So I went ahead and hitchhiked down there. Talk about a transfer. So without having supervision around, the whole time I was there, it was almost self-disciplined, really. And we did have inspections once in a while, but that was about it. Nobody really giving us a bad time. And never got in trouble bad enough to even be taken into an officer's talk down, except that one when I told him to get away from the cable. After that, I got to be real close friends with Admiral Nimitz. Actually, we chit-chat just by occasional meeting even, and he'd just say, well, how things going? And just like he was my big brother. What more I can tell you? Some of the things on some of these pictures have probably got some more indications of items. This one here would be a shocker maybe for some people to see, but this open tomb here was opened already. It had been broke into, and when the storm typhoon came, and we knew our campsite was going to be gone just from the reports, and we headed for the hills. And I and two other guys, traveling together on our own, found this spot, and it was quite high up, and it was in the graveyard, and it was open, and I says, do you think that will protect us from the storm? And so we went in and met this guy down here, and he didn't say no, so we used his residence for 3 days while we were there. We had plenty of water, and it was falling from the sky. And I actually had this one, and I went back down to where our camp was, and that's when we took the picture, and then we went back up and put it back into the tomb again and took a picture of the tomb front. This picture here is a picture from the top of the hill just before the storm came. The ships were either moving out to sea, or the small ones were moving back into the bays to get out of the way. This is more pictures on Guam, or on Okinawa, I'm sorry. And these were some of the buildings that were left standing there. This one here was probably, it had to be a palace of some kind. It was very decoratively dressed up, very nice. In this street where this Jeep is, well, the Jeep is actually up off of it. The street running in front was paved with tile, and it had the flower patterns in it that ran clear across the street. And it ran for, a couple of blocks anyway. And then from there on it was rubble again, so you don't know how much more was destroyed. And to this day, I wonder if it's still there. This building here was the Bank of Naha, and this one over here with the three guys on it is Naha, and the little one there is Al Skeps, one of the guys who was in our unit with us all the way. And this building over here was one of the main big buildings that was left standing in Naha. There were a few others back in the backgrounds. Oh yeah, this one here was probably a hotel or something, and it had been turned into a temporary hospital on Okinawa. And actually, I found out while I was there that a neighbor girl was actually a nurse at that site. And I went to see if I could talk to her, see if she was there, but she was gone for that day, so I never did get to see her on Okinawa. And then after leaving Okinawa, we had fun of transferring at sea. Here's the one picture here where actually we went by boat. One of them we actually went by cable, but nobody took any pictures of that. Just a land line between two ships, and you go across with just a dolly wheel up ahead, and you're pulling yourself along and you get over to the other ship. And that's when we transferred from a British ship to the one that had the USS Albatross, which was a seaplane tender, and coming into shore. I don't know if you're getting all the pictures or not. And then on Guam, most of the pictures on Guam were pretty well of landscapes, lots of banana trees, lots of coconut palms, picking coconuts all the time. Oh yeah, here's our little trip on that floating dry dock. This is the floating dry dock as we seen it at Okinawa, up on the top. This is a picture of it down inside. And it was actually big enough to hold a cruiser. And we'd actually jump when we were out there and the water was so nice and warm. The ocean water was like 80, 85 degrees. And we'd jump off the front of this thing because this was being towed by a tug. It had no power of its own. And we'd jump off the front of that, which was a good 35, 40 feet to the water. And then we'd splash in the water while this thing was going by us, and then we'd catch the drag ropes behind and climb back up and get back on the ship again. Never lost anybody. But then this guy came along. Now I got a couple more, yeah. And he kept pestering us. We'd be out there swimming, and all of a sudden he'd show up. And they had a habit of following ships because they were scavengers and they were picking up whatever was being thrown overboard. And so we went in the machine shop and had them make us a fish hook, and went back out and put some spoiled meat on it and threw it overboard, and I was hanging onto the rope and the line, and that thing hit and burnt both my hands, and finally got him tied down, and we winched him up and pulled him up out of there. And this is me down here going to make shark fin soup. And then we didn't have any more playmates in the ocean for going swimming. And we made fun any place we could. After returning home, I spent the first period of time, my folks had picked up a service station and a cafe, and so I was helping out at the service station and getting them established again a little bit in life. The war had caused a few problems because some of the jobs my dad had disappeared, and so he went into business for himself. And of course I went back to school, which kept me at home too. So, and stayed in the service station for 3, 4 years. Good thing I did, because she came to our hometown, my wife, to take teacher training, and they stayed in a residence across the street from the station, and with the cafe there, that's where we got to meet. And so we had to welcome them in to their new residence, so I sent my little brother over there with cans of soda pop for him. And she was the brave one of the 4 that came over there to see who those guys were. And in the meantime, we were talking to them on the phone from the station. And she came into the cafe part, and we were in the service part, station part. And oh no, she's over here. And so we just called her and didn't even know her name, and had her get the phone, and she took the phone and was talking to her classmates, and they asked her, well, who are these guys? And what did she say? They're just a couple of jerks. Well, this jerk kept after her long enough that she finally said yes. And that's been 60 years ago.
You know who the jerk was.
So anyway, that's kept the amusement going on this. But I actually was having some problems from the injury I'd gotten while I was waiting for discharge in Great Lakes. I got hit by a can of milk. I had a bunch of recruits out there unloading a semi-load of canned milk. And they'd taken the stuff out of the center part of the truck, but had left all the top tiers in on both sides of it, and they're just held in by chains. And I said, how are you going to get the top ones down now? So they actually had to bring some cans back in to build a platform so they could stand on that to reach the cans on top. And they started passing them down and made a chain line, and passing one to another. And I turned and walked away from there, and one of the cans that was behind the guy that was unloading came off and hit me in the back as I was walking out onto the deck of the loading dock. And it hit me low in the back, and boy, I got a milk bath, but lots of bruises, and went in to have it checked up, and I wanted out because my time was long time up. And there was nothing they could find really except pretty badly bruised, that's all. And so I went home, but I started having problems later, and that I was losing feeling in my legs. And every once in a while they just kind of lock up. So found out later I had a compression fracture of a vertebrae from it. And we were already been going together then at that time. And I went to, well, the local doctor's the one that found it, and he said, it's beyond our doing right now. So they wondered what the vets would do, and they told me to come into the vets hospital in Fargo, and they're going to make decisions there. And I get in there, and they do all the x-rays all over again and check them out. And they're looking at it, and then all of a sudden, well, see, I don't know what day I went in on, but I was there a couple of days just for examination. And then all of a sudden, nothing was being done because everything was coming to be spit polished because they were having a big inspection coming through the vets hospitals. And so next day that was taking place, and the thing went on and on, and it just so happened this doctor that was on the tour, well, there was a number of doctors, and he stopped and he was talking to one of the officials from there. Is there anything special here that we should take a look at while we're here? And he just, well, yes, we got one right in here that it could be a major problem. And so he came in, and they had the x-rays brought in and stuff, and they were talking to me, and he was checking me over and stuff, and looking at those x-rays and discussing things back and forth for a while, and he went down to look at the surgical facilities. They'd been in that, and he went back down there and came back to the room, and it says, well, here's your prognosis that I can see it. If you don't have it done, you're going to be paralyzed. If you have it done, you've got better than a 50-50 chance of coming out of it, but you could go paralyzed faster with the surgery, because if something happens in surgery, it damages the spinal column. And I says, well, I'm going one way or the other, so might as well go through with it. So he turned around and told him, he says, okay, cancel our stay in Sioux Falls. So the guy got on the phone, and he says, we'll do surgery tomorrow morning. And so the next morning I was in surgery, and I wake up in a plaster cast. And after that, after the healing took place for a week or two or whatever it was, and they took the cast off. Oh, but the first thing, he stayed overnight then that night, and the next morning they came in to see how I was doing before they left for Rapid City, I guess, to pick up their trail again. And he says, how you doing? I says, I don't know, my feet are killing me. He says, well, you got feeling anyway. And what it was is when they were in the plaster cast, the bed had no opening at the foot of the bed. There were just bars. And they had me on the mattress with my toes straight down into the mattress. And all that weight was on them. And so they got a maintenance man in there with a hacksaw, and they cut out some slats and made room for him. And then everything was fine for a while. I came out of the surgery very good. And I had actually been checking with the telephone company for going to work, because I'd worked communications and service. And I went to work for them and actually used a climbing belt, which is a body belt, and that really built up the muscles in the back. And I'm doing that same work with them, strengthened it, and I've had no back trouble out of it since. So. Oh, the doctor, by the way, I found out after he had left the hospital, was the same one that did the surgery on President Kennedy. So the good Lord was watching me all the way. Very, very good. I mean, it just, I can't give him enough credit for it. And I went to work for a phone company, and of course I had this radio deal in service, and the telephone company, well, you have to do everything in the phone company anyway, going through the, so you're familiar with everything, I guess, at that time. Now it's probably a little different. And I was scheduled for the microwave long haul radio that was already being put in across the country. And so I worked that for 36 plus years. And the reason I'm down here in the Staples area is the first radio run that was put in, that I was put on, was the one from the Twin Cities to Wadena, because they put a radar site at Wadena for the early warning system. And now that is now a recovery station for addicts, drug addicts. But and this microwave tower is just out east of Staples here, just west of Motley. That was one of the first towers in. And they kept adding more and more towers to the run, and the company finally positioned me in Brainerd, the center of the state, so I could do the radio work all directions out of here. And most of the stuff that I worked on is now all obsolete. The last things I worked on is still being used, but it's, you know, a lot of the system has completely changed around. I've been checking, and that's only been just a mere 25 years. So that about wraps up a service career and a career with the civilian life. I do like the area, and I'm implant, I would say, into the Staples area, and the groups here have welcomed me with open arms. I was honored to be put into the first honor flight to Washington, and missed that one. And then when the second honor flight was being built, they came and asked me if I would like to go with them as a guardian. And I took that up and found out the difference it was in going on my own, which I still say was a blessing to me, because I got into things that finally cleared my mind of a lot of things that I was holding back. But to be able to go with the veteran and see the change that each veteran goes through as they get to Washington and start going through their different monuments, the World War II, the Vietnam, the Korean, even some of the honor units that are there, and then being at Arlington for the service that's up there. And these veterans, I've noticed it on the first one and the second one, because we're having meetings before we go, organizing and getting them acquainted with each other, because it's going to be a very rush ordeal time-wise. And the first time these people have lived in the community all their life, per se. They know each other on the street. They've said hello to each other. But none of them have ever talked service, per se. No. But as they meet the second time and the third time, then all of a sudden it's almost impossible to get them to do the lineup that we're doing to be able to carry out this flight to Washington and without delaying any time, because they're talking to each other all about different things they've done in service. They're actually opened up. And if their wives are there, like mine, totally astounded. You never said anything like this in your life before. You know, where's it coming from? Because it's all of a sudden they're back into a service setting, and they're re-bringing up the things that they have buried in their life. And I think it's every veteran, no matter what unit they were ever in, or what time, should actually have some kind of a get-together like this somehow to bring out, I think it would bring their stress levels way down if they'd ever get a chance to open up and let it out. And it's the second one. Now this third one, I'm in it at the point that I've actually got one of my co-workers from the telephone company going on this flight. And I'm sure this is going to be exactly the same thing. They're just going to be enthusiastic and be unburdening themselves with a lot of stuff that they've kept hidden. And so I can't say enough for Honor Flight. I mean, it's too fast is the only thing I can say for it, but it's things that we don't have time to give them a full vacation at it. And it's to the American public or the community in raising the funds that have to be involved in getting them there that's amazing. It's really great. Can't say enough for them.